Trees. I've come this morning into a forest, close to my hometown, Turin. We are in Monte San Giorgio, a small mountain close to Pinerolo in western Piedmont. And I've come here today to tell you stories of how, in nature, everything is connected. And trees are master storytellers of the connections between different living beings in ecosystems and between ecosystems and us. The trees have been the first home of our ancestors. Millions of years ago, we used to live on trees. We used to eat on trees, to talk with friends, to make sex, to look for shelter from predators, and to look for prey. All our activities happened on trees. We have descended from trees since then, but maybe this former memory has left a footprint in our soul. And maybe that's why we feel so good when we are walking into a forest. This morning, I would like to bring you along with me to walk in the forest. Not only to feel good, but also to learn about all the different connections that exist between the trees and us. Come with me. But what is a tree? Well, a tree is several different things. We can look at it as a living being. This may sound obvious, but often when we think about trees, including those pines that surround us at the moment, we think about them as static organisms, as unchangeable things that may live but do not experience a lot of change throughout their life. We tend to see trees as if they were always as they are, unchanging, ungrowing. This, of course, is not true. Trees are living beings because they are born. They can be young, such as this young pine here. We can also try and guess his age. With pines, this is easy. It's quite easy to count the whorls or the knots where the branches are attached. We can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's likely that this young fellow here is about 10 years old. And then trees, if they are successful, they grow. They become teenager trees. This one here may have maybe about 30 or 35 years. And then they become adult. They grow, they make their diameter and height larger and larger, and then finally they may also die. Which means one thing, that the forest that we see now wasn't always like this. The trees have grown, and the trees will die in the future, and the forest is in constant change. Even if this change is quite slower than our usual rhythm and speed of life, so we may not notice it immediately. But something that I often suggest my students is this exercise. Come into a forest, try to walk among trees, and try to think, how could this forest look 50 years ago? Or how it may look 50 years from now. Let's make an example. The pines that you see here were most likely planted by humans. This species of pine, black pine, does not grow spontaneously in the area. So there's a high likelihood that it was planted. But there are also other kinds of trees. You can maybe see some oaks here with dry leaves still hanging on their branches from the past autumn. This is an oak. The oak are spontaneous. They were not planted by man. You can also see it from their spatial arrangement, which is quite random. They grew what they could. So this means that 20 or 25 years ago, the oaks were not here yet. We would have been in a pure pine forest, which since then was colonized by more species, by the oak seeds coming from somewhere around here or brought by animals maybe through the acorns that then germinated and gave rise to adult trees. So change is the rule even in the forest, even with trees, and even when change is quite slow. But what's in a tree that makes it so special as a living being? Trees are master at one thing: living while staying still. Trees cannot move around a lot. In fact, they are fixed to the soil. They are anchored by their roots. So this means that they must find ways to make a living and resist to environmental pressures while always staying in the same place. And how do trees make a living? By some kind of magic. They convert air into something solid. This machinery is what is contained in leaves. Leaves are the authors and the heroes of photosynthesis, a chemical reaction that takes atmospheric CO2, carbon dioxide, and turns it not only into oxygen, which is a waste product for the plant, but most of all, turns it into the tree itself. The CO2 is how the tree makes the food and the material for itself, for living, for growing. Up to the point that if we take an adult tree with stem, roots and everything, 50% of all the weight of the tree is made of carbon. This means that the tree is actually made of air, of something that used to be a gas that I'm exhaling also at the moment. The tree is taking it even from my breath, even as I speak, and turn it into wood, roots, and soil. And you can keep track of this magic even in this very moment as you are listening to my short talk. Just take a look at the closest wooden object that you have handy at this moment. It may be a desk, a chair, it may be your favorite bookshelf, or even your favorite book. And think that 50% in weight of that object used to be air, used to be atmospheric CO2 that now is a solid product in your hand. And how does this magic happen? Well, photosynthesis needs something to occur. It doesn't need only CO2, but it needs two important components that trees require for life. The first one is light. As a chemical reaction, photosynthesis may happen only in presence of abundant sunlight that provides the energy for the electrons to be kicked out of their atoms and start the chemical reaction that turns CO2 into glucose and other products. So, trying to reach the light is the moral or physical imperative for all plants, including trees. And this is exactly the reason that has brought to the evolution of the stem. A stem is a column of wood that the tree uses to try and reach the light before its competitors. When we are in a forest, the first thing that happens before our very eyes is a constant and continuous fight for light. All trees, each one with their own strategy, try to overcome the others and try to reach the light before the others in order to have access to the energy that's necessary for photosynthesis. And what's interesting is that trees and plants have different strategies to try and reach the light. Not all of them like being engaged in a strenuous fight for growing as tall as possible. Some plants choose different strategies and try to beat the others in time. This is why we are here in mid-February and we see already flowering plants in this forest. These violets have chosen a different strategy to reach light. They flower before the trees have fully foliated, have fully developed their spring leaf. So they try to beat them in time. They try to flower and be here and access the small light that's available in the middle of February, before all the other trees in the forest start using it. The different strategies that trees and plants use to reach light also depend on what's called their physiological traits, the physiological characteristics that make photosynthesis easier or harder for each of them, for each different species of plant. Pines, the trees that are above my head in this moment, are called light-loving species or pioneer species. So their leaves carry out photosynthesis in the best way possible when they can access full sunlight. So this is why they are trying to grow so tall here, in order to bring their leaf, the uppermost leaf, under full sunlight. And this is why you would always find a pine tree being born and growing in an open field, and rarely or never below a closed canopy. If you look at what we call the understory, the lower floor of the forest, you would never see young pines growing here. There's just not enough light for them to germinate and to grow up. So if you want pine to reproduce, you can either wait for some trees to die or even accelerate the process yourself by what we call forest management. By cutting down some trees, we open up the canopy, we create what's called a gap in the canopy, and we make light available on the forest floor for most species or the desired species to germinate. Forest management, therefore, is not only and not actually about cutting trees, but about letting new trees grow and creating the conditions in the forest that the seeds of each species like to germinate and grow up. A different strategy to access light is what is displayed by the so-called shade-tolerant species. As the name implies, these plants are much more tolerant of shade, and they can carry out photosynthesis even when they grow below the canopy of other trees. This implies that they don't need to grow very tall on thick stems to reach the upper part of the forest. It also implies that their leaves are quite large because they have to maximize the photosynthetic surface, the area of the leaf that contains the cells capable of carrying out photosynthesis. This means that each forest is a mixture of different strategies. And if you are a tree, you can choose the way in which you want to live. Do you want to imply all your energy into trying to grow tall, as these pines do? Or do you want to imply your energy and the water and the nutrients that the soil gives you access to be resistant and to wait patiently, carrying out photosynthesis in high shade until something happens and then you are free to grow? And some species of trees are master at waiting. Silver fir, for example, can wait 200 years as a small seedling, maybe 20 or 30 centimeters in height. And it can still survive for this long period, carrying out photosynthesis until a gap in the canopy opens up and it can start growing again. So if you see a small fir, don't trust its size to estimate its age. It can be much older than you.